Hi, come on up. All right, so our next presentation is Standardizing Ontology Metadata in the OBO Registry and Beyond. Randi, thank you.
Hi, I'm going to talk about what he just said. I work at the Lowy Institute for Allergy and Immunology and the Immune Epitope Database Project. So the Open Biomedical Ontologies, the OBO Foundry, was established...
Closer to the mic.
Maybe I'm too short. It was established in 2001 as a community effort to converge towards a suite of freely shared interoperable ontologies that cover biology and biomedicine. It has always been based entirely on volunteer efforts and amounts to more than 150 active ontology projects. And probably everyone here is more familiar with the OBO Foundry than myself, so I don't need to harp on it that much. But the goals of the OBO Foundry are to provide support to the community, to host stable pearls, ontology terms, to host access to those OWL files of the ontologies, and to foster discussion forums where people can discuss principles for ontology development and with the goal of getting interoperable reference ontologies to cover the major domains. And within the OBO registry, the metadata for those ontologies can be found, and this is where people can go to get more information about the ontologies. And this information needs to be accurate and consistent, so that is what led to recent efforts that I'm going to discuss about how to update that data in the OBO registry. So if anyone here has any hobbies that are messy, like woodworking or arts and crafts or sewing, you make a big mess when you're doing development, and cleaning it up and keeping everything tidy and accurate is part of the process of building a good ontology. So this effort was funded by NIH OBO Services Grant, and the goal is to improve the consistency and the completeness of the data in the registry and reduce the need for manual inspection going forward once we're done. And we plan on doing this by building a low-cost, high-value approach that will be sustainable and scalable to keep the OBO registry accurate and consistent. So we started with standardizing the metadata that is in the registry files themselves. And there's a large number of properties or tags that each ontology uses. It's up to 200 different types of metadata that are being stored with limited overlap between the different ontologies. And this same type of metadata is stored in other places like the OWL file itself, the project's homepages, and in OntoB and BioPortal. And the differences between these locations may seem trivial or a minor thing, but it's bad to put out there conflicting information, and it's bad for a new person who thinks they want to be involved in ontology or use an ontology for their project. If they go to the OBO registry and the homepage they're given doesn't work, or the contact person they're given is no longer with the project. So it's just poor form to have all of this discrepancy. So the goal is to make it all unified and the same. So this is the homepage. If my mousey works. No. It's the homepage of the OBO registry showing all of those ontologies are listed, and you can download the metadata in YAML or JSON and RDF turtle file. And the little icons are metadata tags for a few that were pulled out as being important enough to put on the homepage. And so the envelope is the email. This works. Doesn't matter. The envelope is the email contact, and so if an ontology doesn't have one, then that envelope isn't there. So that means that ontology has no contact listed. And all of this information comes from the individual ontology maintainers themselves. They edit separate YAML files, and there's no constraint on what they put in there, what types of metadata they choose to store, and what tag they use for it. And this all comes together and aggregated in this unified display, so it would be nice if there's some consistency in how it's done. So to clean it up, we started with what tags were the most often used. So if the individual ontologies all separately decided to use the same tag, that sort of gives it some weight. It says that they all thought it was important to have a homepage if most people used a homepage. And then we also use the OBO principles to help us identify which ones were important. So if there's some information in the OBO principles about some type of property, that does also give it some weight. So we chose these 9 different types of tags to start with as being important. Partially it's because they were heavily used, and we'd like to choose a project that was going to have some success from the start, and also because they're less controversial if everyone's already agreed they think they're important. So the title and the ID of the ontology, those are pretty common to everyone. Everyone knows what a homepage is. The contact information, how to contact that ontology. And then the product itself is the OWL file, and then licensing information. on a textual description of the ontology. And so the definitions for these tags were things that we came up with in our project among ourselves as part of our group, but then we vetted them with the greater OBO community through calls and emails. And then the examples here are from different ontologies. They're just examples that were already in place for each of those 9 things for separate different ontologies. So what we did was verify, does each ontology have those metadata tags, and do they have something for them, and is it up to date? So was it email? Did that email work? It was a link to a homepage or a license URL. Did it resolve? We visited each link, and then we updated the data that's in the registry based on the information provided back to us. And most of what we did was update contact people and emails. We fixed a number of outdated home pages. A lot of people used to use Google code pages, and now they're using GitHub pages. And then licensing turned out to be what was missing the most, and it caused the most controversy. So some of the difficult issues encountered were there a number of ontologies who have lost leadership. Either the person in charge retired or changed their jobs, a few cases of people who died. And in those cases, there isn't always necessarily another person that the ontology is handed off to. So there are some orphan ontologies. And then some of the contacts happen to be mailing lists that were restricted. So if an outsider wanted to contact that ontology, they're not actually allowed to. So you try and email them, and your email bounces back and says, you're not part of this group, so you can't use our email list. So that's poor form. It's not good public relations. And then there's a couple that don't have a homepage. And then the unclear licensing information was a recurring issue that came up again and again. So I pointed people to the OBO website where the principals address licensing. And so it gives 2 points on the Foundry website. It says first, use CC by 3 or later, which lets others distribute, remix, tweak, or build upon the work. Or use CC 0, that waives your right to the ontology and places in the public domain. And then point number 2 is sort of vague. We just urge you to carefully consider your license, but it also gives a link to a discussion. There's a web discussion where people are going into more detail about the pros and cons of the different licenses. And as a result of this process, we learned that most of the OBO Foundry ontologies use CC by 3, but we also learned that people want more information about it, and more discussion is needed beyond what I'm going to talk about now. And then going forward, we want to validate this information and build it in to part of the system so that we don't always have to have a human keeping track of all of this. So we want there to be some value beyond just what we're doing this year. So we want to make the fact that certain tags are present part of the continuous integration server each time a pull request is triggered. So anyone can trigger a pull request for any of these ontologies, and then the OBO community approves and merges them together. So if we require these tags be present and put a little bit of validation in, so if it's a URL, does it resolve? If it's email, does it have an @ symbol in it? If it's not an email, it shouldn't have an @ symbol in it, for example. And then just some overall statistics. So we started with 156 active ontologies, and 42 were obsolete from the beginning, and totally ignored those. 31 already had each of these 9 tags and had something there, but we went ahead and contacted them all because just because there was an email listed doesn't mean it still works. And in the end, 22 tried to complete but couldn't fill out all of the needed metadata. 28 had no response whatsoever, or their email address didn't work, and one of them became obsolete through the process. And just in the past week since I made these slides, 6 more have completed, so we have 111 of the 156 that are complete for those 9 initial selected tags. And the plan to help get everyone up to speed is more outreach to the people who aren't responding with their ontologies. We've sent several emails. Maybe we'll call people, maybe we'll Skype people, visit their office. Talk to their colleagues, publicly shame them. But if an ontology is completely abandoned, it will be considered for removal from the OBO registry. And then to help the people who are trying to respond and get their ontologies up to date, more guidance for what to do about licensing. And then we want to coordinate beyond just that OBO registry website. The same metadata is stored in the OWL files. So we would look there next. So the OWL data in the metadata in the OWL files is also controlled by each of the individual ontologies, but it's linked to on the OBO Foundry homepage, and it should be consistent in the two locations. And there's no agreed upon standard of what metadata should be in the OWL file versus in that registry file. So we started with comparing just three properties, the title, description, and license, between what was in the registry and the OWL file, and there was only a minority of OWL files included those three. And often they didn't use the same property across different ontologies for the same thing, so it made it really difficult to query. And this work is done by Becky Tauber, and she's developed a lot of validation to check these OWL files, and that's a completely separate talk that Becky should present at another time. But the goal is to harmonize those two locations and make them consistent and have a set of checks that Becky's developed that can be run at will and then hosted on the OBO website, but also something that we can run as a whole set and email out and let people know where things stand and make these regular checks that are part of the build process. And then we want to coordinate further with, of course, the ontology homepages, because very often that information also is there. And so the OBO registry may say that one person is the contact, and the ontology's website may say a different person is a contact. We want to make those all consistent. So we'll first start by just pointing out these inconsistencies, and then the ontology maintainer has to manage the consistency going forward, that they need to edit their own home pages. But we can help coordinate that by putting that information out there and making it easily accessible. And then we also want to coordinate further with those external resources that host the same type of information, OntoB and BioPortal and OLS. So we'll start by just, once we've finished and we're sure we have a good set of data, announce that we are now confident in what we're hosting on the OBO registry, and then help ease automation of the process to pull the data directly from OBO registry to host in these sites, as BioPortal already does, and then work towards agreement of what conventions for metadata, what should be stored and how it should be stored, what tags should be used. So things like homepages and emails aren't specific to ontologies, so we want to coordinate with fair sharing, Wikidata, and other sources like that for whatever metadata people deem is important, how they want to store it. We want to be involved and keep up to date. And then we want to expand what we've done. We just picked those 9 tags to start, but there's other types of metadata that the OBO principles deem important. So next we want to focus on primary citation and versioning, with the primary citation being how does that ontology want to be cited if someone uses it, and versioning, what is the version of that ontology. Those are both high value targets, but we're also going to look into all sorts of metadata and come up with a list of maybe other things that should be encouraged, figure out what tags should be used for them, define them, and vet this through the bigger community, because we want to offer what people need. We're not trying to force them to clean up their workspaces. We want to help them clean up their workspaces. So we want to hear what types of metadata people in the community need and care about. And thank you. This is our team. So Bjorn and Chris, the PIs, and James and Becky are doing the automated validation checks, and I'm the head housekeeper. So that's it.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentations. Have you considered to use schema.org as the schema for your tags?
No, but sure.
Okay. Do you know what is schema.org?
Hmm?
Do you know what is schema.org?
I have heard of it, but I haven't been there.
Okay, so I think there's like a one schema for your need, which is creative work. I think it's very nice.
Okay,
All right.
I'll check it out. Thanks.
All right.
Bjorn has something to say.
And I would just like to ask, so thank you for the talk, but how does this fit into the general approaches or general efforts to build this comprehensive minimum information standards for ontologies? So you said this is mainly related to maybe 9 tags.
Yeah, that was just
for the metadata.
chosen.
But now I know that the OBO and the OBO Foundry, they're collecting these. They have these minimum information standards, which are about 150 tags as absolutely required. And how does this relate? So this is, I think, a part of this, but why is it not all the 100 something?
So we just chose 9 tags to start, because there was so much missing metadata. We wanted to choose something that would be low-hanging fruit. So probably we're going to be very busy in getting through the 150 and maybe reassessing what's truly important and what is not achievable. So we are, I mean, like homepage we thought was simple enough, but we already found some cases they don't exist.
Sorry, I guess this is a common. So there's the schema.org and also the other thing. So there's not a lack of standards for potentially capturing this information. There's an abundance of possible standards how to do it. And this is not actually a hard problem at all. There's plenty that we could adopt, but everybody does something somewhat different. And some people use Dublin Core, and some people use schema.org, and others use direct OWL properties or whatever. We just have to agree on something. That's all.
So you mentioned versioning, which as a user is probably the most important thing you could do. I mostly know where to find people, but versions are hard. And a lot of the ontologies do versioning by date. So they just say, I downloaded it on July 8th, 2018, and there's no way to tell if it's the same as it was on July 7th, 2018. Is it a new version or not? And so using dates for versioning makes it difficult on users. So not only would it be nice if you actually got versions in some standard way, but they were good versionings that allowed us to tell when the major changes had happened and when minor changes had happened and when no changes happened. So as you do your versioning metadata work, maybe you could use that as an incentive to get the various ontologies to do a better job of versioning themselves.
That's a very good and timely suggestion, and we will consider it for sure. So.
Yeah, so I think this is really great. I think it's very important actually to recognize that funding was provided for you and the team to do this curation effort. I think it's one of the big challenges in the development of repositories is to keep them up to date with the entries, and you sort of indicated that it's quite a laborious effort to do that. How do we imagine doing that with many of the other repositories that are, for instance, have been developed through the BD2K efforts and others that are trying to maintain, the sort of collections of entries that may require updates and discussions with the original contributors? How do you see that happening in a scalable way?
Honestly, I don't see it happening. I think it's very difficult because people don't keep in mind that they will need to manage this long past the original people that were excited to set it up have retired. So I think it'll become a problem that will then be addressed in the future.
Definitely a challenge to be faced.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Randi? Yes, John.
I can't resist. I'll chime in. So I think
Answers.
I think, Michael, your last question is a really, really good one, and it's much broader than the speaker's talk, which was nice. But if we're going to get reproducibility, and if we're going to get sustainability and reusability of ontologies, we really need to have some kind of carrot and stick approach. And so it would be nice if, for example, this community and others could come up with a policy for what metadata is essential, like versioning perhaps, and then maybe some kind of stick where publishers don't allow you to publish a paper until you deposit it in a repository with the appropriate annotations, or some kind of carrot. I don't know what that would be, but yeah, it's a big problem. I just wanted to chime in and say that's crucial for reusability and reproducibility.
Yeah, there are other repositories. So the linked open vocabularies is alternate to BioPortal and Aberall. There are other registries like the Data Hub, which when people build that linked open data cloud, they have huge troubles because a lot of those resources are no longer available, and communities are trying to figure out how to keep those things up to date. And so it's nice to see that there are some efforts, at least in the ontology community, to address that. I think some of that is indeed in the standardization of having, trackers, wikis, sort of standard places where that content is published. But it sounds like there's still a little bit more work to be done in terms of email addresses and other things like that that goes to the next relevant person. But it seems like we still need notifications that projects die in some way or become obsolete, and then we can update that. Yeah. Funerals on.
Public announcements?
So I think we talked about this last year, right? Which was how do we let ontologies die? I think you're on the pathway of maybe setting up protocols for letting that happen. So good, very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we have a series of short talks. So let's get started.